Welcome to Inner Compass. I'm Shirley Hoogstra. When there's a country on the other side of the planet developing nuclear capabilities and long-range missiles, what do? The U.S. wonders about North Korea, and North Korea wonders about us. Clearly a case for delicate diplomacy. Today we'll be talking with a mediator who's been working on this problem for over 20 years. Join us on Inner Compass.
From the campus of Calvin College, this is Inner Compass, exploring how people use faith and ethics to guide them through critical issues of today.
Welcome to Inner Compass. I'm Shirley Hoogstra, and my guest today is Tony Namkung, Senior Advisor to Governor Bill Richardson, and an independent consultant on U.S.-Asian relations, North Korea, and nuclear arms, who has worked for over 20 years with government and business leaders throughout Asia and the United States. Welcome, Tony.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here.
So what's fascinating about the Korean conflict is that there is still a war going on between North and South Korea in the sense that there's been no treaty. Isn't that correct?
That's correct. The warring parties came to a stalemate and signed in 1953 an armistice, not a peace treaty. So technically, yes, the nations are still at war.
Is there really still a threat, though, that North Korea would ever invade South Korea or South Korea would ever invade North Korea?
Well, there's not much talk of that in more recent years, but there are always incidents. There was a naval clash in the West Sea, or as some people would call it, the Yellow Sea, that claimed several lives. And there were two much more serious clashes, naval clashes, between the two navies about 10 years ago. And so it remains a tinderbox, and one that can become inflamed very quickly if the right decisions are not made.
So who would like the war resolved more, North Korea or South Korea?
Well, that's a very difficult question. I think both sides would like to see an end to the conflict, but neither side wants to give in.
I see. Does the U.S. play a role in trying to help resolve that? And does North Korea's nuclear armaments hinder any kind of resolution?
Well, the U.S. tends to focus almost exclusively on the nuclear issue rather than on the reconciliation or peacemaking efforts on behalf of the two Koreas.
Is that a mistake?
Yes, I believe it is a mistake because it's really treating the symptoms. It's really not treating the root causes of the conflict. And until the U.S. plays a more proactive role in facilitating the dialogue between South and North, the nuclear issue will not go away.
So actually, this inability to have a resolution of the war is causing this nuclear problem that we always hear about in the West.
Absolutely. Although most administration officials will say, take care of the nuclear issue first, disarm your nuclear weapons, and then we'll talk about a peace treaty to replace the armistice.
But North Korea is concerned about their security. Is that why they arm themselves in this way?
That's exactly what they claim. They've claimed over the years that they need this as a nuclear deterrent against the threat of an invasion from the U.S. and South Korea.
And do they worry about China or Russia?
In more recent years, yes, with the resurgence of China now in a major way on the global scene, they have developed concerns about China. Russia tends not to play as large a role in East Asian affairs today. They seem a little less concerned about Russia, but Russia is always capable, of course, of expansionism, and so it remains a concern.
They talk about reunification between the North and South, but it seems to me that North Korea as a country would not want to be unified. They wouldn't want to give up their national identity. Why do they talk about, nor would South Korea, so why do people talk about unification in that way?
Well, because for thousands of years it was one people.
It's true.
And it's only been in the last half century that they've been separated. So
families and history would do that, would sort of move towards unification, but in terms of this, it's been called a rogue state. Why would they want to give up that identity that seems so very powerfully set around a leader and about a particular Stalinistic government?
They would not want to give it up. They would want to unify the Korean Peninsula on their terms.
Oh, I see. So they would want South Korea to be sort of integrated into that system.
Yes. Thankfully, they've not talked in recent years about trying to absorb the South or defeat the South. I think they would like to see, through peaceful means, some sort of accommodation of the South, whereby or in which their terms prevail.
I see. And is that really feasible given the affluence and the economic prosperity of the South, the freedoms that the South Korea experience? Why would that even be realistic to think that there would be an integration into the North Korean system?
Well, that's a very good question. That's precisely the question that most South Koreans would ask.
Right.
But North Koreans would ask a different question. They would say, what's happened to your national identity? You've been influenced way too much by the U.S. and by Japan and by the outside world. And so we need to reunify, but we need to become more Korean.
Do you think that that's accurate, that North Korea is more Korean than South Korea?
Well, more traditionally Korean. I'm not passing judgment on whether that's good or bad.
Right.
But even South Koreans who have visited North Korea, and there are many, many who have now done so in the past decade, will say that they've retained the traditional customs much better than has the South.
So isolation, which has been seen as a negative part of North Korea, has been a way in which they have preserved more of their culture.
And their sense of national identity.
I see.
In short, they feel that they are more Korean than their compatriots in the South.
Okay.
Of course, the South Koreans are not amused to hear that.
No, because in some ways progress happens, and with progress may come an amelioration of cultural identity for a better good or a greater good, perhaps, which are freedoms and the integration into an international community.
Absolutely.
What are the advantages to being in diplomatic relations with North Korea?
They think that the U.S. stands to benefit from this relationship by having in the Korean Peninsula a buffer between the two would-be regional hegemons of this part of the world, namely China and Japan.
And what would benefit the North Korean side?
Well, to have a protector and a defender in the U.S., someone who could ensure the survival, long-term survival of the Korean people in the face of a resurgent China on the one hand, and a very, at least economically powerful Japan on the other.
So again, it still always comes down to the security issue, that the North Koreans feel insecure with China, Japan, and perhaps their South Korean neighbor. Mm-hmm. And so they, even though they've been hostile towards the United States, and they would claim we've been hostile towards them, they would change their point of view and see us as a protectorate at some point.
Yes, absolutely. And this is the point that escapes many people who follow this issue. But if you look at their statements and you look at the discussions that they've had in private with Americans over the years, it becomes very readily evident that that's precisely what they're looking for.
So it's often surprising to see a small country, 22 million people like North Korea, that's impoverished, having nuclear capabilities. It doesn't seem to go together. How is it that they achieve nuclear capabilities, and how realistic is it? I mean, could they get a missile to the United States, or is Japan at risk, South Korea at risk more readily?
The risks are all around.
Oh.
The long-term ballistic missile tests they conduct shows that they are extending their capability of reaching distances that go well beyond Japan and South Korea or China or Russia. It's probably only a matter of time before they are able to reach much further distances. For them, this is a deterrent, however. It's not meant to be the beginning phases of a long-term military buildup of threatening weapons. They fire their missiles and they conduct their nuclear tests in large part to force the U.S. into a new relationship.
Right, it's almost like pay attention to us, we are important, and the longer you defer paying attention to us, the more capabilities we'll have.
The worse the situation is going to get.
So then we hear about them selling this capability to other countries that are not friendly to the United States. So they're in relationship with Iran, and were they in relationship with Iraq?
And Syria.
And Syria, I see. And are they selling their capabilities to them?
Well, so far they've not sold any nuclear technology or nuclear materials because this would be a red line, which if they crossed would create all sorts of problems for them. They have traded in missile technology and missile parts and equipment for many, many years, for decades actually. This is not, of course, not welcome, but it's not the same degree of threat that the nuclear materials and the long-range ballistic missiles present.
But we worry about it.
Oh yes, absolutely.
Which is part of their diplomatic sort of quiver, right? They can keep these arrows in the quiver. Look, if you don't work with us, United States, we can make your life more miserable.
Yes.
By making other countries more powerful.
Well, the sale of missile technology and missile parts is largely an economic issue. Being such an impoverished nation that's unable to trade worldwide, and they have lots of things to trade, by the way. They have enormous reserves of minerals, for example. One estimate recently has placed the value of their minerals at something like $6 trillion.
Wow.
Because they are unable to trade freely around the world due to the sanctions that are in place, they get most of their foreign exchange income through the sale of missiles and missile parts.
So we're in some ways, because the sanctions are necessary, and the UN has given them sanctions, and the United States has operated as a sanctioning partner. But so we need the sanctions, but yet if they were able to trade more and get away from what we would consider unhelpful kinds of patterns of behavior, how do you get that started? How do you make that wheel turn?
Well, that would be just one piece of the picture, one segment. The issues would have to be dealt with on a much broader basis, namely the security relations between the two countries and between North Korea and its immediate neighbors, and political relations that would then bring an end to this kind of very unwelcome behavior.
So what is our role as a superpower in the world today in terms of North Korea?
Well, North Korea is a slightly different creature from some of the unsavory regimes in the Middle East. North Korea is trying to establish friendly relations with the U.S. and with the other parties with whom they've had traditionally hostile relations, namely Japan and South Korea. They have a strange way of going about this by shooting off missiles and exploding nuclear devices.
Right.
But they were, for example, the first foreign nation to extend official condolences after 9/11.
Really?
Yes. And our policymakers don't like to acknowledge things like this because it's a little inconvenient.
Right.
But this shows you that the picture is a little more complicated than it seems from what you read in the press.
So what would you like us as a United States population to understand about North Korea that you don't think we're understanding, either from our press or what we hear from our own government?
With the ending of the Cold War, North Korea found itself surrounded by threats all over, not just from its traditional enemies, the U.S. and Japan and South Korea, but with a China that seemed to have broken out of the old communist bloc, beginning with its normalization of relations with the U.S. and the clear rupture between China and the Soviet Union within the communist camp, with the U.S.-Soviet détente via Reagan and Gorbachev in the 1980s. They felt that they were now being increasingly surrounded by unfriendly nations, and so they launched a long-term program to make peace with the U.S., with Japan, with South Korea, while keeping their erstwhile communist allies at bay. And this is the drama that that's been unfolding since about 1990 or so, and we're still in the middle of that.
It almost feels exhausting as you describe it. I mean, here's this small country having to manage their one set of neighbors, and they're having to worry about the increasing economic giant that's China at their border. And how then do they take care of their people, and how do they provide for the food and respond to famine?
Not very well. Almost all of their resources go into military armaments and into trying to put even a modicum amount of food on the table and provide clothes for the people to wear. The last 20 years have been enormously difficult.
Yes. When you think about how to establish actual dialogue, if you had 30 minutes with President Obama, what would you tell him? And if you had 30 minutes with the North Korean leadership, what would you tell them? Now you're in charge. They get to say, Tony, you've done this for 30 years. We're giving it to you. What would you do?
I would say the nuclear threat is only a symptom of the issue to President Obama. I think he would understand this. And we need to address the root causes of the conflict. And the U.S. needs to move beyond the nuclear issue. As important as it is, we need to disarm the North Koreans. As important as this is, the U.S. needs to pay more attention to the reconciliation process between South and North, become a friendly facilitator, an honest broker, a party that always urges the two sides to talk. When the talks go well, to remain in the background, to allow the principals themselves to resolve their differences. When the talks are not going well, to play a more active role. And secondly, to normalize relations with North Korea. They seem to want to be on friendly terms. Of course, this comes with a big price. They have to open up their system, and they have to allow their people to interact with our people, and basically meaning that their system will have to undergo some adjustments over time. To the North Korean leadership, I would say this policy of engaging in provocative actions and talking friendly is not getting them anywhere. And there's got to be some adjustment in that. There's got to be more movement on returning to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, on the question of inspections of their nuclear facilities. That if this is actually what they want long term, they're going to have to cooperate more on the military and security side.
Well, that sounds like a blueprint for progress. How do you get your information, for instance, to the U.S. government officials, and how have you interacted with North Korean officials?
Well, this has been over some 20 or more years now. There have been times when I have inserted myself into the diplomatic process because I felt that we were facing a real danger, that we needed somehow to ratchet down the tensions or diffuse the tensions. At other times, the several governments, not only the U.S. and North Korea, but the other parties as well, have asked for me to play a small role in keeping channels of communication open, arranging meetings, and that sort of thing. And so I've been a kind of person in the middle. It's a thankless job and not terribly rewarding, but
it's for a good cause.
If in the end it can be said that we were able to keep the talks going, at least, it will have been very satisfying.
Do you have friends in North Korea?
I'm not sure I would call them friends. I have people I know very well, but it's very difficult to penetrate that veil. They don't let you become friends.
And why don't they want you to become a friend?
They don't want you to become a friend because of the closed nature of their system. There's nothing can come in that might pose a threat in any way or raise questions that they can't answer. And so
what's the danger?
The danger, obviously, is that as I found out when I left the mission school in Japan and came to the U.S., that there's a whole new world out there that is much, much larger than anything that I'd known. That's the danger of, not necessarily that the North Korean leadership does not want its people to become knowledgeable about world affairs, but it would be too abrupt. And if they could manage it gradually over time, I think it would be okay.
So this idea of internet access or the idea of a free press, this would be terrifying, it seems to me, to the North Korean leadership.
I don't think they would know what to do with that,
right.
Even if it were offered to them, even if it were available. You know, what a free press is or how a free press operates.
So in the emerging youth of North Korea, do they know about the internet? Are they going to at all pressure their government? Are we going to have a Tiananmen Square in North Korea like we had in China?
No, we will not have a Tiananmen Square. But the youth, not only the youth, but the general educated population is not only familiar with, but active participants in the intranet that is within North Korea itself. Only a limited number of people have access to the internet. But that will grow over time. The question is how to manage this over time rather than trying to introduce changes too abruptly.
Who do they trust? Who do the North Koreans trust? And would they ever trust an American like yourself? Or would it have to be closer to home?
They trust only themselves, I'm afraid.
So who are the new thinkers that are coming up in North Korea? Who is thinking about bringing North Korea into the new age?
Well, if I had the answer to that question, I'd be a rich man. We don't know.
You don't know.
We don't know. And most North Koreans don't know either.
How do you get information? How do they do planning there?
Well, the North Koreans for many years have had a permanent mission to the UN in New York.
We do.
The North Koreans
okay.
do, yes. So we've had, and it's called the New York Channel in U.S.-North Korean relations. So we've had many, many conversations and contacts with them in New York. And we have, when I say we, I mean not only myself, but a number of people have been going back and forth for many years. I myself have undertaken more than 30 trips to North Korea.
When you go to North Korea and take those 30 trips, the first trip and the trip now, are you dealing with the same people? Are you dealing with different people? And do you think they say, oh, Tony's coming, we can count on him?
I hope they don't say we can count on him. My role is really to prod the two sides and prod all the sides, actually, into dialogue. I'm not sure that North Koreans in general have any knowledge of you know what things lie ahead. These things come to them as they're announced. There doesn't seem to be a lot of debate domestically about policies and things.
When you take your people, the North Korean people, and the leadership keeps them contained, do you take away their will and their creativity and their imagination for something in the future?
Well, they are so intensely devoted to their system and loyal to their system that they derive a great deal of psychological satisfaction from that. And so there isn't much of a sense of wanting to absorb everything and anything out there that might be of interest, that might be different from what they know.
So even with the deprivations that we would say they endure on a daily basis, what do they say about those deprivations? Because do they ever make a connection between their system of government and the deprivations? Well,
their tendency is to attribute these problems to the outside, not to themselves. And secondly, they say that they suffered far worse calamities during the Korean War when the entire infrastructure, physical infrastructure, was demolished. For example, millions of people were killed. They can endure virtually anything. This is what they say.
So they have a mindset of endurance.
That's right.
And how is it that the government creates this loyalty?
Well, sheer momentum or inertia, something that's been going on for decades and decades, has a tendency to keep going unless there's some very powerful stimulus from the outside. But also they, as I suggested earlier, seem to think that they are much more Korean. And if you look at the history of the Korean people, the Koreans have always been buffeted on all sides by much larger powers. There have been many other peoples in Northeast Asia who have literally disappeared from the scene, having been swallowed up or defeated or conquered. The North Koreans are tough survivors, if nothing else. And so this gives them the motivation to keep going, and in the knowledge that nothing is going to take their identity away as Koreans.
So they have a long view of the world.
They do.
And are you hopeful for change?
I am hopeful for change, particularly with the advent of the Obama administration. I think that, I'm not sure about some of the people in the administration, but I think the president himself is prepared to deal with people who unclench their fists. And if we can get the North Koreans to understand that and to show a little more a desire to compromise, I think we might see some very important changes.
Excellent. My guest today has been Tony Namkung, Senior Advisor to Governor Bill Richardson and Mediator on U.S.-Asian Relations. I'm Shirley Hoogstra, and thank you for watching Inner Compass.